The first thing he noticed was that the man didn't look up. The second, that he didn't need him to. And that was, strangely enough. It was early November when Ezra found him, the man on the bench, seated beneath a dying elm in the city's old stone park, wrapped in a silence so complete it made the air feel holy. Ezra had walked that path countless times, not to go anywhere, just to move. The kind of walking that was less about the body and more about trying to outpace the thoughts chewing through it. He almost passed him that morning, as he always did, with strangers. But something about the man's posture, a stillness too heavy to be casual, slowed Ezra's steps. He turned back, hesitated, and then, without understanding why, sat down beside him. Not close. Not far, like an instinct. The man didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't speak. Ezra cleared his throat, half expecting to be ignored. "Funny thing," he said, voice almost cracking from disuse. "I don't know why I stopped." Silence. "I don't usually talk to people, not unless they ask, and even then, it's usually a lie. Polite lies, safe ones." Still, the man gave no reply. He just looked ahead, his eyes lost somewhere in the leaves. Ezra chuckled dryly. "You're probably not even listening." And yet, something in that silence pressed him to continue. It wasn't awkward. It was absorbing, as if the very act of being allowed to speak without response, without defense, was the first freedom he'd had in years. So he spoke. "I used to be someone, or I thought I was. Had a house, wife, 2 kids, 1 dog, the cliché. But then something in me began to rot, quietly. You ever felt that? Like your inside started turning to dust before the outside even cracked?" No reply. Just a soft wind moving through branches overhead. I was 29 when I realized I hated who I'd become. Not because I failed, but because I succeeded at building a life I didn't believe in. The man blinked slowly, not acknowledgement, but not disinterest either. Ezra looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "I left them, my family, packed a bag, told myself it was just for a weekend. That was 6 years ago. Haven't called since." He waited then, for judgment, for scorn, for even a twitch of reaction. Nothing, only stillness. And in that vacuum, a strange thing happened. Ezra inhaled, deeply, fully, for the first time in years. "Do you think people change?" he asked, voice smaller now. "Or do we just peel back the layers until we see what we were always too scared to admit?" The man remained silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon where children laughed and pigeons scattered across the sun-creased cobblestones. Ezra laughed. It surprised him. He felt tears at the edge of it. "This is ridiculous," he said, wiping his eyes. "I don't even know your name." And still, the man didn't speak. But Ezra wasn't angry. He stood slowly, feeling lighter and stranger than he had in years. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked with a smirk, as though they were old friends. And for the first time, the man on the bench turned, just slightly. Just enough for Ezra to see a faint, knowing smile twitch at the corner of his lips. He said nothing, but Ezra nodded, as if he'd heard everything he needed to, and walked away with silence ringing louder than any voice he'd ever known. He came back the next day. And the day after that. And the day after that. Ezra didn't know what this ritual had become, only that it felt like oxygen. Each morning, he sat beside the man on the bench, and each time, the silence between them stretched a little longer, and meant a little more. It was absurd, really, how much one could say without being answered. And yet, the stranger's stillness was not void. It was vessel, container, mirror. Somehow, Ezra had begun to pour himself out, and still there seemed to be more. He spoke of things he had buried so deeply that even his dreams had stopped visiting them. "My brother died when I was 16, he confessed on the 4th morning. Car accident. I was the one driving." He paused, breathing sharp. Like memory was glass he'd just stepped on barefoot. I told the police he grabbed the wheel. He didn't. I swerved. I was angry. We'd been fighting about something stupid. Music or girls or who Mom loved more. I don't even remember. But I do remember the sound of metal and the silence that followed. The man didn't react. His eyes remained calm, like a pond untouched by storm. My father never forgave me, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I didn't forgive myself. So I stopped being his son, and I stopped being my brother's brother. I just stopped. There was something strange, even sacred, in speaking without fear of being fixed. No, you did your best. No, you were just a kid, just space. Empty, painful, necessary space. Each day, Ezra brought a new shard of himself. Like broken pottery, he hoped someone might help him glue back together, only to realize the glue wasn't in the answers, but in the act of being seen at all. One morning, as frost crept over the edge of the bench, he brought up his ex-wife. She was brilliant, he said, smiling sadly. Not the way movies paint love. She wasn't wild or chaotic or dramatic. She was steady, like the hum of an old song you didn't know you remembered. He rubbed his hands together, not from cold, but nerves. She used to hold my face when I spiraled, just held it. No words, no solutions. And I hated that. I thought it was passive, weak. I wanted her to fight me, scream at me, call me out. But she just loved me, and I resented it because I didn't feel worth loving. Ezra looked at the sky, pale and without definition. She deserved better. The kids too. That's the part I can't shake. I didn't just run from them. I ran from the version of myself that could have made it right. He turned slowly, expecting, again, nothing. But this time, the man was holding something. A notebook. Closed. Worn. Resting on his lap. Ezra stared at it. His heart thumped oddly. Was it for him? Had the man been writing all this time? Taking notes like a psychiatrist behind a two-way mirror? But no. He made no move to hand it over. He simply placed his palm flat against the cover and kept staring forward. Ezra sat back, unnerved and intrigued. "You're not just here for the fresh air, are you?" he asked softly. "You've got a story too. I can feel it. You're not empty. You're just full in a different language." The wind picked up, scattering yellow leaves across their feet like nature's applause. "I talk because I'm trying to be heard," Ezra whispered, "but maybe you listen because you're trying to be remembered." The stranger didn't move, but Ezra could feel something shifting. The air between them, once a chasm, now felt stitched by something unspoken and ancient. The quiet bond between two men who had let life bruise them into shadows. And for the first time, Ezra realized something terrifying. He wanted this stranger to speak. He needed it. Because if he didn't, he feared he might never understand the mirror he'd begun to see in him. The snow came early that year. By the 7th week, the park was wrapped in white silence, the kind that muffles even your thoughts. Ezra still came, scarf wrapped high, gloves tight, thermos steaming like some desperate relic of warmth. The man, always early, always still, hadn't missed a single morning, yet he had not spoken a single word. It was maddening. Ezra didn't know when it shifted from comfort to obsession, but it had. Somewhere between confession and communion, he had started needing something in return. Not advice, not approval, just proof that he wasn't pouring his soul into a ghost. "You know what's funny?" he muttered, not caring anymore who heard. "I've spoken more to you in 2 months than to anyone in the last 10 years. And still, I know nothing about you. Not even your name." The man didn't blink. Ezra chuckled bitterly. "You could be a figment of my guilt for all I know." He sipped the coffee. Bitter. Burned. "I used to think pain made me deep," he went on. "That trauma was the furnace of wisdom, that if I suffered enough, I'd emerge more whole, more human. But really, all it did was harden me. I turned, suffering into personality, regret into identity. I called myself a poet, but I was just a coward hiding behind metaphors. The stranger's hand twitched. Ezra noticed, a barely perceptible movement, fingers tightening over the notebook. That damned notebook. Is that where the truth lives? Ezra asked. In there? Is that why you don't speak, because you've locked the words away? Or is it that you're afraid of what they might do if you let them out? The stranger looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes were not vacant. They were oceans, still on the surface but violent underneath. Eyes that had witnessed endings not written by choice. And for the first time, Ezra wasn't sure he wanted to know. Some stories weren't wounds. They were open doors to rooms where the air hadn't moved in years. I lied to everyone, Ezra said suddenly. But worst of all, I lied to myself. I told myself I left my family to find myself. But the truth? I didn't want to be found. The snow thickened. Time slowed. I was afraid, he continued, voice low. Afraid of being loved after I had proven I didn't deserve it. Afraid that they might forgive me, and I'd have to live with the weight of their grace. That kind of love? It's heavy. It's not soft or sweet. It demands something brutal, humility. And I didn't have it. Ezra clenched his fists, nails digging into fabric. So I wore the mask. The tragic artist, the misunderstood father, the lonely prophet, and I let people pity me, because pity was easier than intimacy. He laughed. A hollow, breaking laugh. I built a religion around my regret. And you, he turned to the man, you became my altar, but I'm starting to think you're not here for me. You're here for you. A gust of wind knocked the notebook off the man's lap. Ezra bent to pick it up, hands. Ezra didn't move. That single word, Ezra, lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. It wasn't just recognition. It wasn't just a name. It was memory, resurrected. He turned slowly. The man hadn't shifted, hadn't raised his head, but something had changed. A crack in the marble, the faintest tremor beneath the surface. You spoke, Ezra said, as if saying it aloud would anchor reality. The man's lips parted again. I listened, he whispered. Long enough. Ezra approached the bench like one would approach an altar after desecration. Reverent, fearful. He sat down, leaving inches between them that felt like miles. Who are you? He asked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his coat and slowly pulled out the notebook. The leather was frayed, the pages swollen from time and cold. He handed it to Ezra without meeting his gaze. Ezra hesitated. I shouldn't. You already did, the man said. In your mind. You've been writing your own ending in me for weeks. Might as well read how mine began. Ezra opened the book. There were no titles, no dates. Just a storm of handwriting, frantic, beautiful, wounded. Some pages were scratched out so violently they tore. Others were traced in faded ink, as if written with trembling hands. I watched my daughter die while I was watching the news. They called it a statistical consequence. I called it Tuesday. Ezra stopped breathing. The words weren't poetic. They were raw, charred remnants of a life set aflame. He flipped to another page. She said, I don't need you to fix me, Dad. I just need you to sit with me in the dark. I turned on the light instead. Ezra closed the notebook. I'm sorry, he said. The man turned to him, eyes heavy with unshed decades. Everyone says that, but no one ever stays long enough to mean it. The bench creaked beneath their silence. I know that kind of grief, Ezra murmured. Different face, same teeth. The man looked up. I had a son, Ezra continued. He used to wait by the door every Saturday. I promised I'd come for him after the divorce. Every week he waited. Every week I didn't show. I told myself it was for his good, that my brokenness would only poison him. But truth is, Ezra swallowed hard. I just couldn't face the version of me he still believed in. Neither man spoke for a long while. Snow fell in slow motion, muffling the park in white stillness. It's strange, the man finally said, how we think silence will spare others from our ruin, but silence doesn't protect. It isolates, like burying a fire beneath the floorboards and praying the house doesn't burn. Ezra nodded slowly. And when it does, we blame the flame, not the hiding. The man offered a ghost of a smile. They used to call me Walter, he said. Used to. Ezra didn't ask what changed. He already knew. Walter stood, his joints stiff. He reached into the inside of his coat again and pulled out a second notebook. Thinner, cleaner. He placed it on the pre-D bench between them. This one's empty, he said. Figured it was time I started writing what hasn't happened yet. Ezra picked it up, ran his fingers over the blank cover. It's lighter than the last. Walter looked at him. Regret has weight. Hope doesn't. The wind howled through the trees. The world felt thinner, like a veil had been lifted. Ezra stood too. He tucked the notebook into his coat. Not for himself, but maybe for the version of him he hadn't met yet. The one who still believed change wasn't a myth. As they turned to walk away, strangers no longer, brothers in silence. Walter paused. I still see her, he said. In the mornings, in the snow, not as a ghost, just a question I haven't answered. Ezra nodded. Then maybe she's listening too. Walter didn't reply, but his shoulders were straighter now, and as he walked into the falling snow, Ezra realized the cold didn't bite the same, because for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't carrying his silence alone. The world didn't shift in grand ways after that morning. There were no trumpet sounds, no lightning bolts, no cinematic scenes of redemption crashing through the heavens. No apologies from the universe for what had been taken. Life, as it always did, kept moving, dispassionate, relentless. But something inside Ezra had changed, and sometimes that was the most revolutionary kind of change. He found himself walking differently, not faster, not stronger, but aware. Of breath, of steps, of the way his shadow moved beside him, as if it too had been listening all along. For the first time in years, Ezra wrote, not stories, not client briefs, not structured responses for therapy evaluations. He wrote honestly. Letters, to a son he hadn't seen in over a decade. To the boy who once stood in the window with toy airplanes, believing in his father's return like a sacred ritual. Ezra wrote what he should have said, what he wished he had been brave enough to feel, and what he feared might never be heard. He didn't send them. Not yet. But they existed now, inked in trembling lines, and that too was a kind of healing. Walter didn't return to the park every day. He came when the weather allowed, sometimes not for weeks, but each time he appeared, the silence was different. Less a prison, more a pause. They spoke about music, war, religion, dreams that turned sour, and nights spent screaming into pillows that didn't answer. And sometimes they said nothing. They just sat, because now that was enough. One evening, as spring began to push gently through the frost, Walter arrived holding a paper bag. He handed it to Ezra. Inside was a photograph. A young girl, maybe 6 or 7, hair and ribbons, missing front teeth, laughing at something just beyond the frame. My daughter, Walter said. Her name was Lila. She used to say the sky was alive and stars were its freckles. Ezra smiled, and something hot swam behind his eyes. I'll remember her. That's why I gave you the picture, Walter said. Not so you'd keep it, but so you'd remember. She mattered, even if the world forgets. Ezra tucked the photo into his notebook. It felt like receiving sacred scripture. They didn't hug. They weren't that kind of friendship, but there was a weight exchanged, unspoken, understood. It was late April when Walter stopped coming. Days passed. then weeks. Ezra asked around, but no one had a last name. No one knew where he stayed. It was as if Walter was a story the city had whispered once and then let go. At first, Ezra feared the worst, but then he realized maybe it wasn't death, maybe it was peace. Some souls don't vanish. They simply arrive at the place they were always walking toward. And maybe Walter had reached his. Ezra returned to the park bench one final time that year. He sat alone, watching. The leaves tremble like tiny flags of change. He opened his notebook, the second one Walter had given him, and flipped to the first empty page. He didn't write anything monumental, just a single line. Sometimes all we need is a listener. Then he closed the book and walked home. They say people are made of stories, but sometimes people are made of listening, of the quiet bravery it takes to carry someone's pain without fixing it, to sit with the weight of another's grief and not run from it. Ezra had learned that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it begins with a stranger who doesn't ask you to be strong, just real. And when you've buried your truth for so long you forgot what it sounds like, having someone hear it can feel like resurrection. If this story opened a wound or healed one, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, someone who may be waiting for a listener, just like you were.